200 milliseconds, this is like a quarter of the circumference of the world at the speed of light. So the speed of light starts to become a problem.
The latest consolidation wave is creating massive faceless companies where cultures clash.
Instead of recording and dubbing, you essentially just type. Welcome to SlaterPod 68. Hi, Esther.
Hey, Florian. How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
I am very well. Yes.
Today we have a very special guest. We have Spence Green, the CEO of Lilt. Lilt.com. Lilt. So Lilt's one of the world's leading AI agencies in the language industry. Let's use that term, AI agency. Started 6-7 years ago, as a pure technology company, and now built like a major company around it and raised a ton of money from VCs, including Sequoia and RepPoint. You know, we had Tom Tungush from RepPoint at our SlaterCon San Francisco conference, the penultimate IRL conference we had.
Pre-COVID,
Pre-COVID. And Spence actually was at our very first IRL SlaterCon as a speaker in London back in, I think it was 2017, somewhere around Old Street. Today, we will talk about the PRO Act in the U.S. And just before this podcast, we're trying to wrap our head around it. So pardon all the U.S. Listeners. Pardon us if we don't fully get it, but we're trying just to bring it up as a news item, and hopefully you can take some of it away and read the article, etc. It is probably going to have an impact on the language industry. Staying in the U.S., TransPerfect shared their quarterly results. Want to take another detour into the voice synthesis and avatar space with Synthesia that just raised more money, and then you're going to talk a little bit about media localization as well.
Yep.
Some interesting things there, and frank statements, bold statements. Hey, so if you haven't registered for SlaterCon Remote, we got 3 weeks left. And still a lot to do from our side, but we're getting ready, and it's an exciting program. So looking forward to it. Register, and this may be one of the last few free podcasts. No, I'm just kidding. But before just today, I learned that Apple yesterday launched a new podcast, or they're about to launch a new podcast subscription service. And just generally redoing the podcast platform. Yeah, did you hear about this?
No.
So
was this because they had a big launch, didn't they? That I didn't watch, but I was aware of. Yeah. Yeah.
They had one of their launches. They launched like a new iMacs. Like I think the first set of iMacs in 10 years. Like super flat. It's crazy. They're they're flatter than my monitor, and it's an entire computer inside. So they look pretty good. And then some iPad Pros and, redoing the lineup. But they also, they're launching, or they're redesigning the entire podcast platform. I heard right now it's kind of even with Spotify in terms of user numbers. So they're relaunching the entire podcast platform. And I did a bit of research into this. So they're now going to launch premium subscriptions. So you can actually get paid for podcasts. So because right now podcasts are on a kind of open network, like open source RSS feed. So, we plug the podcast in and then it goes to all these platforms for free, right? But now Apple's going to offer us and other creators the opportunity to make money. So you can sell your podcast or maybe parts of it, or add some, paid versions of it with, proprietary, stuff that's just gated. I know it's podcast talk, but it's interesting. So let's see where this goes. We'll maybe try it out. Could be part of Slater Pro. So as Slater Pro subscribers, you also get the extended version with a couple more interesting stories. Anyways, so what's going on with TransPerfect, Esther? Just highlights. What were the results?
Well, a lot. It sounds like they've been busy in the first quarter of 2021, so since the new year. Their Q1 revenues into the end of March 2021 were in excess of $230 million.
Nice.
It's a lot. And that is an increase of approximately, just over 20%, 21%, or $40 million. So they grew by $40 million.
They grew by one mid-sized challenge leader LSP in one quarter. In one quarter.
Yeah. Well, what they make in one quarter is bigger than like the, I don't know, 10th largest LSP.
So I think this is confirming our hypothesis of the boom, right? We first floated last week that we're getting into a boom here. I mean, like a 21% growth organically, nonetheless, in one quarter. That's strong. That's super strong. I guess maybe last year they had a bit of a slower. It was probably slowing down towards the end of the quarter because of COVID already. But still, 21%. That's great. And again, it's all organic. They didn't buy any companies. So they mentioned that they were busy on the tech side. They improved some of the user interface on Global Link, their TMS, and their data annotation platform, Dataforce, which apparently grew a lot in 2020. So we mentioned this a couple of times, like they're competing with the likes of Appen and Scale AI and all these other companies out there, right? What else grew? Did they mention specific verticals as well?
They did. Yeah, they called out a couple of standout business units. So they said gaming and media localization in particular, as well as the ones you mentioned, the AI data. And then they said, which sounds like good news for not just TransPerfect, but the rest of the industry, that on a sector basis, travel and tourism seem to be recovering. And for TransPerfect, Phil Shaw said that that's encouraging because it's a big practice area for them. And he also said that retail and consumer product sectors are growing as well. So,
and I think their tech, their license part, so that's the subscriptions. I don't know what you call it. Maybe because it's bigger, it's not like it's not a browser based, but like all of the Global Link products are, I mean, these are licenses, right? These are somewhat heavy enterprise grade technologies. So that also did well, which is super profitable for them, of course. I mean, the margins are a lot higher on pieces of software. So if I remember correctly, from the whole legal thing, they did disclose once the size. I think it was in, what was it, like $30-40 million annual recurring revenue from technology. That must have grown by now to maybe 10-20 more. So very good business for them. I mean, competing with all of the TMSs that are out there. So maybe sometimes we kind of forget about TransPerfect's Global Link because it's not a standalone product out there doing its own marketing, but certainly one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest ones in the space. And so travel retail, but who's traveling? Is anybody traveling? I mean, I guess in the US, a lot of people are traveling, but that shouldn't generate too much translation demand. I mean, who else is traveling? I'm not traveling.
Who else is traveling? Yeah. I mean, I think it's what we were saying last week, that it's in anticipation of people booking holidays and wanting to travel. Those kind of things.
I wonder when things open up, like for real. Like it feels probably a lot better now in the UK. It feels quite okay here, but like...
It does, but then I heard somebody on the news today saying that they're expecting some kind of summer surge, which just put like the fear of God into me.
Summer surge with mutant viruses and all of this stuff.
I don't know. Just as we're like enjoying the bars and pubs and restaurants and everything else opening up, it gets all shut down again. But
not gonna happen.
We shall see.
Anyway, hot take, super strong results from TransPerfect, kind of bodes well for RWS that are set to announce on Thursday. We're recording this on a Wednesday, so by the time you listen to this, it's you can check RWS's results. Kind of bodes well. I mean, if TransPerfect did so well, then I'm sure that RWS will do well as well.
RWS is just a trading update, though, isn't it? It's not the full set of results, I think.
No, but it's not that TransPerfect gives us any profitability figures. So this is the RWS's figures are going to be more detailed than TransPerfect's one. So so a lot of things coming together here, and I think that super cycle boom theory is starting to play out in front of our very eyes. But in the US, more legislation. So let's try to unpack this. Just short, what's going on and how does it impact the language industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in short, we don't know how it's going to how it's going to impact on the language industry, but it's another piece of potential legislation, as you said, or more accurately, an amendment to an existing legislation. So this is, as you said, called the PRO Act. And the news piece, if you like, is that on the 6th of March of this year, House Democrats in the US passed the Protecting the Right to Organize, or the PRO Act, an amendment to existing legislation, which is intended to make organization of unions and collective bargaining easier for employees. But I think it all comes back to this central question of, what does it mean to be an employee, and what rights and flexibilities do you have if you're an employee versus not? Yeah, so we'll look at it, I think, as it kind of unfolds. But as usual, I think the association, the ALC, of language companies there in the US, I mean, they're obviously paying close attention to what happens, probably busy analyzing some of what it's going to mean as well. But I mean, they're effectively lobbying, I think, at the moment for workable and clear exemptions to this PRO Act amendment for the knowledge-based industries. So sort of a similar line, I think, as they were taking when it came to the AB5, the gig worker sort of legislation that was going on in California a couple of years ago.
How is that in the UK? Didn't you guys have some similar legislation, kind of basically trying to force companies like Uber to treat their drivers better? And that did that have an impact on services jobs, or like professional services jobs? You don't know?
I wouldn't want to say too much, because I think it's all very fine, and I'm not entirely certain of the information. But I know that there was a case involving Uber quite recently where Uber has been, I think, forced to treat their workers slightly differently. In terms of having a wider impact on services, I don't think that's going to happen immediately. I think we're kind of busy with other things. As in, I don't think there's the appetite, there's not the political appetite, I don't think, to go and overhaul what essentially would be like the tax system. And I think that's already sort of been looked at, I think 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago.
Got it. Okay, yeah. Well, certainly something to keep an eye on, especially now that you have like a Democratic House, Senate, and the presidency, right? So maybe if they really push, they could get this through, but who knows? I don't know about there's always these complexities around the US system. Moving on to something also super complex, but which seems less which I want to make less complex for the user, is Synthesia. I always struggle pronouncing this with the TH there. So that is this the synthetic video avatar startup in the UK, which we know from this Beckham video, where like Beckham was speaking in like 10 languages and the lips were moving correctly, right? The lip movement goes back to the discussion we had with Paper Cup last week. So they raised some money. They raised another 12.5 million. And if you really go into it, it's so interesting. And I mean on many levels, but we obviously want to kind of unpack the language component here. So in a nutshell, again, you can create very easily, you can create an avatar, and you can choose from like a set of avatars, maybe 10. And you instead of recording and dubbing, you essentially just type the content or whatever, copy paste, right? And then that avatar looks kind of lifelike, would actually speak in, selection of like 40 languages, what you're punching in a synthetic voice, and the lip movements would be lifelike in a sense. It would look really real. And apparently, I mean, there's this whole kind of the vision pitch around it. We read the VentureBeat article, and we're gonna. Yeah. I think we sent him a couple of questions as well. So by the time this comes out, we probably have our own piece.
Hopefully.
So there's this whole kind of grander pitch around it, but for now, I think they're getting a lot of interest from enterprises for things like customer service stuff, and kind of support things, and maybe kind of trial ad campaigns, things like that. And they said they've been overwhelmed by the response in the last 6 months since they launched in beta, and they have now thousands of users, yada yada. So a lot of traction. And just to again, belabor that point for a second. You don't, I mean, you can translate it, right? I mean, so you can empty it, but if you don't translate it, you can just basically put the multilingual content into the system, and then you have that avatar speak in those, in the number of languages that you want, and it's already in a sense localized. So what it does is it really does away with all of this infrastructure around recording and having actors and that really very heavy infrastructure. And that, I think that's also one of their pitches. Let me just try to find that quote. Oh yeah, so they're saying today video production is costly, complex, and unscalable. It requires studios, actors, cameras, and post-production. It's an incredibly long and multidisciplinary process rooted in physical space and sensors. And well, they do away with all of this, right? Now, do people want to look at an avatar, which kind of still looks slightly fake? Not necessarily in all in all contexts, but in many, maybe they do, maybe they don't care, right?
I really liked. Sorry to jump in, but they
please jump in. I'm rambling.
They apparently, I think they said in the press release, they were responsible for this advert for Just Eat, like a food delivery service that was had Snoop Dogg in it. It doesn't have any language component. I just really like that advert.
But
so
like
they've
Snoop
effectively
Dogg...
done an avatar of like Snoop Dogg singing in the Just Eat advert. Yeah, I really like it.
So hang on, that's their advert?
I think they said in the press release, that they'd like collaborated on it or worked on it.
Okay.
I need to double check, but
well, they're good at marketing. Snoop Dogg, Beckham.
And I think they said advertising was obviously one of the use cases for for this kind of AI video generation. I think they're kind of calling it at the high level.
Yeah, like but their own marketing is good because I mean, again, Snoop Dogg, Beckham. Now I guess also that's all like '90s references. So maybe next would be more millennial and Gen Z focused. Anyway, so deep fake concerns. Just to close on that, obviously there's deep fake concerns, right? I mean, if you can do that, you can do the whole. I think we spoke about what was it? Tom Cruise. More 90s or late 80s. That deep fake video.
I'm gonna have to make the point that some of these people are timeless. I think not necessarily Tom Cruise. Well, Snoop Dogg I think has got a certain level of longevity, but without being too much of a cultural commentator. I'll leave it there.
This very 90s Snoop Dogg, right? I mean, obviously kept.
He's got a Netflix series, so he can't be that dated.
Maybe the Netflix series is going to be localized by Zoo Digital. How are they doing? I'm trying to segue.
I know. Zoo Digital, yes. Thank you for the prompt. Zoo Digital, yes. So they are a media localization company, as we know, based in the UK. So they're listed also on the London Stock Exchange, and we had some forecasts coming out of Zoo Digital this week. So they actually raised their forecast for the financial year, which ended at the end of March 2021. And they raised their expectations by $1.5 million US. So they'd previously said they were expecting full year revenues of at least $38 million, I think was how they phrased it originally. And they have since recently raised it to $39.5 million US.
So
and
that's
they said EBITDA.
No, that's TransPerfect's growth in one quarter. So they need to do some catch up. No, just kidding. Good result.
I mean, it's something. But over last year, they would. I mean, I think they would have grown like 33% Zoo. So it's it's a considerable growth there for them.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they said EBITDA is expected to be $4.5 million US, which apparently is more than double the year before. So it's all sounding quite positive there.
That's good. And since they're in this cloud dubbing space, I mean, if that growth can continue. And it's more tech driven, so it's very. This can double or triple quite easily. So,
yeah, I mean, and they're also saying that I think generally in the market is picking up as new title productions are coming back. So filming's able to happen again after the lockdowns in Hollywood. And they also said that the first quarter of the financial year, so that is just the few weeks of April that they would have had, has also started well. So good, I think, positive outlook for them for the year, which is good.
And somebody who wants to cloud their positive outlook is Mr. Björn Livergren.
Maybe,
who launched a new company.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is super interesting. I mean, and for anybody who's kind of who was familiar with BTI Studios or has kind of followed the consolidation that's been happening in the media localization space with a keen eye, Bjorn may well have been a name that you will have been familiar with from that, because he was the founder of BTI Studios, and he was also the company's CEO for more than 2 decades. BTI in 2019, people might remember, was merged with iUno Media Group. So Bjorn had sort of extensive experience leading a media localization company, and he's now setting out with 2 of his 2 former execs from BTI Studios to co-found a new company called Link Media. So apparently it was in the works. It's been in the works for nearly a year now, but the company officially launched, I think, in March 2021. But yeah, these were the kind of some of the punchy statements that I think you were talking about, Florian, where he's talking about sort of why now is a good time to be starting out in media localization. So Bjorn said he thinks the time is ideal right now. And I think they're really kind of targeting what they're saying is a boutique service, and kind of saying that I'll just read the quote. The latest consolidation wave is creating massive faceless companies where cultures clash and there's a risk for more focus on corporate politics.
Nice and he said aggressive comment there, Bjorn.
Well, I asked and he answered, so
yeah.
So I mean, yeah, he's saying that he wants to provide the company to provide a boutique style service that works closely with clients on a local basis. I think it's very much this kind of, customer led, premium, very much like hand holding clients, being led by clients, which I think the larger companies would say they also do. But I think, yeah, it's kind of putting that for them at the forefront.
So he really must love this industry, coming back after 2 decades, BTI selling it. Yeah. I mean, he could retire on some island somewhere and just, look into the distance.
Yeah, I think the title was something like not done with localization yet, because I think what he had said to us is that all 3 of the founders now, they had been, very successful execs at BTI Studios, but they kind of got together and decided that actually, that they weren't quite finished. There was more to be done. So they've launched, which is great. And they also, raised a seed round, a small seed round that was participated in by the founders. So
yeah, and some outside guys. All right, well, let's move over to Spence, who is in the middle of his, first, the first entrepreneurial journey after 5-6 years. So really looking forward to talking to Spence and learning more about what's going on at Lilt, what they're doing, how they're growing, and learn a bit more about the technology, which I got to be honest, I was a fan of the technology when I first started using it. And I will try to get maybe Spence can give me an account back, because they when they
withdrew your account.
Well, they just, they basically, as we said, they're now a services company, so it was no longer.
I remember. Yeah.
AI agency / tech-enabled services company. All right, over to Spence in a second.
See you soon.
And welcome back. Welcome back here with a very special guest today. We got Spence Green, the CEO of Lilt, definitely one of the language industry's most exciting companies on the pod. Hi, Spence.
Hi, Florian. How are you?
Very good. Where in the world does this podcast find you?
I'm in Berkeley, California.
There you go. I think last time, or actually the one time we met, we were in Palo Alto. I think that was like in, 2017. So.
We first met in Dublin, if you'll recall. I think we were at Lockworld something like this.
That's right, Lockworld. And then Palo Alto. Yeah, and then, you were at our conference. So So when we first covered Lilt back in 2016, we called you a company to watch. So there's quite a bit of history in between. So tell us just a bit more about your background. What brought you into the translation, localization, tech space?
Well, my background and my co-founder's background as well, we're both researchers. We both worked on machine translation, and we met working on Google Translate. And I think for both of us, the motivation for working on language translation was, I think, the opportunity to have impact in the world, and specifically in the area of information access, and that language presents a barrier to opportunity for a lot of people that don't speak English. And so both of us went to grad school to work on that problem. And I think how we sort of came to think about localization was more, machine translation systems can give you a prediction, but they can't tell you whether they're right. And so in settings where you need to know whether the translation is correct, which is the sort of the business case, or book publishing, which is originally what we were thinking about, we started to think about how could we use machines that are scalable and efficient to make it possible for there to be more information available in the world that right now is mostly translated by people. And so that was the original, sort of thinking behind going down this path, which eventually led to a company.
Got it.
Yeah, it's super interesting and high. I don't think we have met in person, so thanks. It's nice to be talking to you, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, Esther.
But yeah, I thought that the sort of interesting aspect, and that there are many when it comes to Lilt, but is thinking about this kind of tech-enabled language services, or I think that as the term is kind of being popularized, the AI agency, which I think we'll talk a bit more about later. But perhaps you can share a bit more around that tech piece as it pertains to Lilt, and how it went from this kind of vision that you described through to implementation at scale.
Well, originally, within the academic context, what we build is called an interactive machine translation system. So this is a machine translation system that is really designed for interaction with a human being. And this idea is very old. It goes back to the late 60s. And it was a thread of research that had sort of had periods where people worked on it, and then periods when people didn't work on it very much. And nobody was really working on it, certainly in the early, well, that's false. Philip Kuhn, who you probably know, he was working on it kind of as a side project in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And when I was at Google, I was getting to know Franz Zoch, and Franz had worked on it, who was, sort of the creator of Google Translate. And Franz had worked on it when he was in grad school in the late 90s and early 2000s. He wrote a paper in 2003 that was really quite good, but people didn't really cite it. And he and I were having lunch one day, and I was asking him about this paper, and he said, I really think this was always a good idea, and somebody should work on it because that paper should have more citations. So, so I kind of thought, well, if he thinks it's a good idea, maybe it's something we ought to go investigate a bit more. And so that was, that turned into the research project of like really restarting this thread of research on interactive machine translation. And there never really was a thought of starting a company. It was just, this thing that we call human in the loop now, like getting that to work.
So from a tech perspective, the latency, I remember in the early days, was an issue. I mean, is that still an issue, or has it been solved, or what are some of the other key issues when like you really live interact with machine translation? Yeah,
there's some really interesting engineering issues that come up, and I think that this, they're sort of in the research setting, nobody had really gotten a system to work that demonstrated that it could make people faster and could make them more accurate. So we got those results in the research setting. So then we had this research prototype, and then it was like, well, how do you enable people to use that? And there are two problems that you have when you deploy a system like this. And the two key things that it does is it does self-training, so it learns as you use it, and it's interactive. So when you type, it predicts, it retranslates every time you type a word. Yeah. So you have two problems there. One is synchronization of the updates, as you have multiple people working on the same model. And then you have latency, as you rightly point out, because if you're typing, you have a budget of about 200 milliseconds. Otherwise, the system feels sluggish. And 200 milliseconds, this is like, a quarter of the circumference of the world, at the speed of light. So the speed of light starts to become a problem. And so this is enabled by, these, public cloud. Now you have multi-regional, you have bunches of regions that you can run in. And so the engineering challenge is to have a system that runs in multiple regions around the world. So it's near users and it can be responsive, but then it can also coordinate global updates. So you have a globally consistent system that's learning. And that's been an engineering challenge for a really interesting one for 5 years now. And the system is quite fast globally in all the regions that we run in.
I love the I love when the speed of light becomes a problem. That's a good quote.
It's a nice problem to have. Yeah. But so when you're thinking about some of those problems or removing some of those hurdles, I mean, what kind of people are you engaging? What kind of profiles of employees are you bringing on board, both on the development side and then also as you sort of scale further, like bringing on kind of business people, etc. Who's on the team really? Who's on board with Lilt at the moment?
Well, I think these systems are quite complicated to build, and it's still the case. Although, neural network approaches to building machine translation systems have sort of broadened the number of people working in this area. Like the old statistical systems, they were very idiosyncratic, the way that they were trained, the way that they were built. And there was just a small group of people that, that built them. Now more people build them because the models and architectures that are used for lots of different tasks. And so a broader array of people that are just generally good machine learning people can work on them. But there's still quite a bit of, sort of black magic to get them to work correctly. So the core of the team is still a research team. We have about 15 researchers split between San Francisco and Berlin, that build the core technology. And then all around that are an engineering team that builds the application infrastructure, and all of the user-facing software. And then as we've become a service provider, I think a lot of the change in the past, 2 years or so has been adding in a services team, and adding in a sales team that knows how to sell in this industry. So it's kind of a merging between software technology people and then the sort of domain knowledge of how to sell language services in the enterprise. And that has we have an interesting dynamic internally as these two groups of people that ordinarily don't interact with each other do. We actually have every month there's a services research staff meeting where they meet and they talk about problems. And these are two groups of people that ordinarily would not have the opportunity to interact, and it's really well attended, and people like get really excited about this. So I think that's a good thing.
But was that a kind of a reaction to, as you took the business from like really pure SaaS, right, and then added the services layer on top? Obviously, that expanded the market dramatically. Was that kind of a reaction to the dynamics that were bubbling up, and then just making sure that these two parts of the business really kind of interact very well? Because it must have been challenging, right? Going from SaaS, pure SaaS tech, and then, adding the service component, kind of the more conventional sales and marketing structure on top of it.
Yes, a services business is very different operationally than a software business. But I think there's tremendous power in these what are known as technology-enabled services businesses, in that you can build the process and the software in parallel and do that in an agile fashion. And that gives you a tremendous operational lever. It's much more challenging to coordinate, but I think when you're trying to automate what's historically been a function that's very, very manual, you sort of have to do both at the same time. It's not sufficient to just build the technology and then assume that a service is going to adapt to it. And I think in lots of different industries, entrepreneurs are finding that this is true.
Kind of from a CEO point of view, like, were there particular challenges that you remember from going from kind of the visionary tech to kind of the CEO of a growth services company that's now employing like hundreds of staff?
Well, I think that as the company starts to grow and get larger, a bigger part of this job becomes ensuring that we have a strong company culture and combating complacency, and ensuring that we continue to move quickly and innovate. And I think that's the real trick, and that comes down to hiring and company culture.
Yeah. I mean, I think when we're thinking about this tech-enabled language services, or I recalls when we had Tom Tungers from Redpoint, who's one of your investors, back at speaking at SlaterCon. I think we said pre-pandemic days, about a year and a half ago. But he was talking back then about the investment thesis that they were operating or running at the time based on this AI agency, which, I mean, as I understand it, it's sort of a question of looking at the layer of the economy that's occupied by sort of outsourced service providers or agencies. And then, you think about law or accounting and these kind of very manual, traditionally manual professional services, and looking at what part of that work can be automated and therefore delivered at a lower cost. So, I mean, as it pertains to localization and translation, I mean, how do you see localization and translation fitting into that spectrum? And do you think there's still a lot of work being done, by LSPs, by translators, that's not yet automated, that could be really by the current state tech?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like, it's a question of unit economics, and, it 20 cents a word or whatever, the big agencies are charging, for a single 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, that works out to $60 to $80. That's what businesses are paying right now. And with technology, we've cut that in half, but that's still a lot of money. And until we can get that down to $1 or 50 cents or something like that, we haven't solved the problem. And the problem is making it possible for everybody to have the same experience that you and I are having speaking English. And that's just not true right now. If you navigate pretty much any company's website or just go around the internet, just flick it into Korean and click a few links, and then you get kicked back into English. That's the problem that needs to be solved. And it's an operational problem. It's a efficiency problem, and it's not a problem that can be fixed with hiring, which is the traditional solution in a manual approach. There just aren't enough translators in the world for the amount of information that there is. So there has to be a technology-enabled solution if we want to live in a world where everybody has the same experience, irrespective of the language that they speak.
So let's go a bit to the kind of the engine of this all, the MT. I mean, we frantically try to keep up to date with what's going on and like the current state of the art in machine translation. But from where you are where you're at, what are some of the most exciting developments right now? I mean, we keep saying like low resources and all of this, but do you have anything that stands out in 2021?
Well, our team mostly, I mean, so the transformer and its variants is the dominant architecture, not just within machine translation, but more broadly in NLP and in sequence modeling. So that, that hasn't really changed since that paper was published in July of 2017. But I think that our team in particular is focused on domain adaptation to model learning. And we've had some tremendous improvements in that. So what we track in production as our translators are working is next word prediction accuracy, which means as they're typing, the system proposes a next word. How often do they pick that versus typing something differently? And at the beginning of last year, so at the beginning of 2020, it was, right in the sort of 60% range. And the figure from last month was 78%. So that means that the system is, getting 8 out of 10 words right that are being predicted. And now people are still reading every word, but this is a meaningful improvement in how much work the machines are doing to augment what people do. And that doesn't come at the expense of people. We're hiring lots of translators right now. But it makes it possible for each one of them to do multiple times the amount of work per day that they would ordinarily do. And that's how we amplify the very limited and constrained human resources that we have to be able to make more information available.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, how are you scaling then? Because you mentioned sort of enterprise sales and this enterprise setup. How are you scaling with established localization or enterprise localization buyers that are maybe used to a more traditional way of approaching localization, from pricing to, the whole thing, really?
Well, I think our solution is, we've tried to make it as easy to adopt as possible. And so that means if you have a translation management system and you want to keep that, that's wonderful. We can plug into that. If you don't want a translation management system and you want us to integrate directly with all of your business systems, that's also wonderful. We can do that. We have an account, we have a customer surface that looks very much like a service provider. You have an account manager and what we call a services strategist, who's your linguistic resource, and then a solutions architect. So a lot of that would be familiar. I think the bigger issue is just that historically, I think people who run localization, one of the main things that they optimize on is risk mitigation. And I think one of the biggest barriers to entry in this industry is just simply that people don't change things unless they're compelled to. And this presents a barrier for new technologies, new processes, new ideas. And that's the single thing that I would like to see change, is more openness to new ideas and to innovation.
And also, like we're talking about kind of on the geekier side of the machine translation, but when you talk to end clients, right, the marketing people, those global marketing teams, like they talk about, global customer experience, they kind of take it a little bit from a broader perspective. So like, how can we kind of, elevate that conversation around localization so it becomes kind of part of this bigger picture and we talk in the same lingo to these people? Like, is that something that you're focusing on?
It is. I think that language should be thought about as a competency of customer experience. So what do I mean by that? Companies spend a bunch of time on customer experience because the world is really competitive and there are lots of alternatives. And so one way that you can differentiate is the degree to which you personalize the experience for each customer, so that you can build loyalty with your customer base. And one way to not build loyalty is, for example, consider I buy a Toyota and all of the gauges and all of the the dashboard and the instruments and the display, those are all in Japanese, and I can't change that. That doesn't make me feel like sort of a high value, customer of Toyota. And that's how a lot of, digital experiences are on the internet. And I think when you move up from localization into the strategic level of thinking about customer experience, well, then you need to think about what's the experience of the customer when they go to the website, when they use the app, the support site, when they call into support, all the different components, the touch points of where you interact with a business. And is that consistent in the same way that it is for English? And I think for most businesses, it just really isn't. And so localization is kind of a function box that you put documents into, or, and you get documents out of. It's not a strategic function that helps a business stitch all of these things together. There's an operational and strategic element to that. And I think that's where language is properly situated in the enterprise.
It's fascinating, I think, to think about how, the potential that localization has if it is truly thought about as a strategic element. Is there a way, or how do you think that LSPs can help raise the profile of localization within these enterprise organizations? Is it a case of sort of helping the localization leaders have a seat or access to the executive table, or how does that happen, really, that localization gets elevated to a strategic level, do you think?
Well, I think that it has to be, it's sort of the responsibility. I think as a service provider, we're not employees of the business. So I think a lot of the sort of, when the localization job is focused on vendor management, there's just not going to be any change affected internally. But when that job is transformed into a strategic enabler of other parts of the business, and the language that's used is one of customer experience and growth, that's the language of every business wants to grow. That's what they're designed to do. So if you can present a business case in those terms, with data to support that business case, then I think that's how people, this can be thought of differently in the enterprise.
And is there data also to support that when you're talking about sort of return on investment or value add for clients? How are people looking at this in a tangible way when you're building that kind of business case? What really speaks to customers, do you think?
Yeah. So our research team last year, we built this, it's kind of a prototype product right now, but we use it for some of our customers, and it does two things. It crawls websites, and then it connects to an analytics product like Google Analytics, and it shows it can show for like a page, if you show that in English and you show that in another language, differences in engagement, and the results are really strong, and even in surprising cases where you think we have a customer that's a software company, and you sort of think all software engineers speak English, because 20 years ago, most programming languages didn't even support Unicode. So you just had to speak English. But it turns out if you give software engineers the opportunity to read things in their native language, well, then they'll just do it. And you can actually prove that. And then when you prove it visually and in a data-oriented way, then it's not a difficult case to make to expand that experience to other languages. But going into a business meeting and saying, oh, well, we have these LQA metrics, or, we have this cost basis or something, nobody cares.
Do you think generally, where do you see the kind of the improvement adoption, I don't know, or improvement trajectory of this all? I'm a native German speaker, and I'm sensing that companies are starting to figure this out a lot better than it was 5 years ago. It used to be all this kind of almost like German, but in English sentence structure and syntax and grammar. And now some of them really make it truly like localized. And I feel like it speaks to me a lot better. Like, and where do you see this heading over the next 5 years? Do you feel it's going to be like companies will expect, or customers on the internet, they will really expect like a quasi perfect native adopted quality, or how fast will we see this? It's a little bit of a convoluted question, but I don't know.
No, it's a good question, and I will give you a non-scientific and entirely anecdotal answer, which makes me slightly uncomfortable, but I'll give it anyway. Which is that in the time that we've been doing this, what's been most surprising to me is that the rate at which MT is getting better is extraordinary over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But the rate at which companies' quality expectations are increasing is going up at least as fast. And so, and by quality, really when you really get into this, what most companies are talking about is their sort of brand voice or their copy editing guidelines. And historically, companies spend a lot of time writing their English copy editing guidelines, and then it sort of goes through this localization meat grinder, and it comes out the other side as like generic German or something like that. And the real opportunity is to have that degree of specificity and precision in the authoring of the text, both on the source side and the target side. And that's just really hard to do with automation. And so I think that that's kind of a frontier, is that, yes, now systems can generate outputs that are both fluent and adequate, but are they preferred?
No, you totally understood the question. And I really think this is also a massive opportunity for the language industry, tech-enabled, right? That when these quality expectations rise, then people just won't be happy with that, semi-okay German anymore. And they will, all these other guys have this perfect, German that speaks to the consumer. Like, why are we not getting this? So I think it's a massive opportunity. Yeah. Quick change of topic. You guys raised some money. I think it's like Series B was the last series about 1.5 years ago. How is it? I mean, just some information around how is it to raise capital for a localization translation related startup, a tech company, and like, what's the perception out there in the VC community about this space generally?
Well, I think that there's been, historically, going back a number of years, there was less investment in this industry. But the last year or two, there's been more venture investment, more private equity investment, and more outside interest. And I think this is really good. More, the objective that we have, if Lilt achieves anything, it's catalyzing change towards all products and services being available in all languages. And we're not going to achieve that on, like the small amount of capital that we've raised. Like the business is growing and we'll do more. But we need lots of companies and lots of capital to catalyze that change in the world, and lots of investment. So I think this is generally a good thing, that there's more outside interest in the language industry, and people are building companies and they're building technology to, in service of this mission, which is really, why we started this company and what we hope to achieve with it.
Do you think, how would you weight this, like the general kind of, availability of capital versus maybe a little bit more excitement around the industry in the investment community? Do you think it's kind of 50-50, or is it generally just a lot of money out there and some of it is chasing localization companies, or is it really also genuine excitement about the space?
Well, there is a lot of money out there. That's true. But I also think that there's more interest in more investors now have this sort of tech-enabled thesis than a few years ago, because I think the experience of building these machine learning companies is that enterprises need a lot of help with change, and adopting these technologies is quite hard. So you just end up building a services function to drive adoption. And that leads to a very different business model than like a pure SaaS business. And I think that more companies are being built this way, and therefore there's more examples of this, and that's generally helps investors develop a thesis.
Yeah.
And when you're pursuing that goal of making products and services available for everybody everywhere, what kind of features does that depend on? And thinking specifically about Lilt, what have you added in the past 12 to 18 months, really, that's been some of the key developments for the roadmap?
Yeah, I'll give two examples. The first is we have a point of view with our integration with the enterprise, which is connector first. And let me describe what we mean by that. I think 10 years ago, the business systems that people used, be they content management systems, source code repositories, document management systems, all of the, generally enterprise content management, those systems didn't have really great multilingual support. And so then you ended up needing these like big pieces of middleware, which we call translation management systems, to kind of augment the deficiencies of those systems and do workflow stuff. But today, the systems that companies are using, they have awesome multilingual support. And so what we've been building towards is building the multilingual capability directly into those systems. And so you can think about it like in much the same way you use Google Translate. It's integrated directly with your phone. It's integrated with your browser. It's integrated with your email, and you have it accessible right there where you're doing content authoring. That's how we're building out our enterprise integrations. And so that means, we'll connect to a TMS if you already have that, and that's your integration point, or we'll build directly into your systems if you're in the process of replatforming and doing digital transformation. So we've gone from, just like a couple of these connectors to, a lot now, 30, 40 of them. And we have a whole team internally working on building these out. So I think that's one big change. That's made it much easier for companies to access language and implement multilingual workflows than before. The second part is that I think internally, when companies are wanting to sort of go to market faster and move faster. And so the internal pieces of the production process to transform a piece of content from one language into another, one of the bottlenecks is QA. And so for the last year and a half, we've been working on this what we call auto review. It's basically a grammatical error correction system that starts to automate part of what a traditional reviewer would do. We spent a lot of time building support for the translation part of the production process and very little time trying to augment the review part of the process. And that actually takes quite a bit of time, especially when you get into like having internal stakeholders review things. And that actually, to your point earlier, Florian, about achieving the preferred translation and like the brand voice in the other language, that's where a lot of that happens at the review phase. So the team has been building this auto review product that we're going to publish a paper on it in the next couple of months and then hopefully get it into production later this year. But I think that's going to increase quality and then also, fix what's been sort of a production bottleneck for a long time. And so look out for that.
So that would be, when you say internal stakeholder, that's not on your side. That's like the in-country marketing director somewhere in China that then gets the content and just wants to adjust it a little bit additionally?
Yeah, because data leakage happens right there. Like those tweaks that they make are really important. And you want to capture that and you want to learn from that. And so that's where putting another learning system in place that can learn from that is really crucial, I think.
Yeah, that's a cool feature, gotta say. Crystal ball outlook. So I got this new thesis, Spence, that we're kind of entering a super cycle. Things are going quite well for the language industry, and probably will so for the next 3, 4, 5 years. How do you see the next 2, 3, 4 years in this industry? Would you agree that it looks quite strong?
I think that the pandemic certainly provided, it's a horrible situation, and a lot of people have, been hurt and suffered. So let me qualify what I'm about to say. But I think one consequence of the pandemic has been that more companies now are focusing on their online and digital experiences. And as a consequence of that thinking, they're also realizing that they need to speak to their customers in their own language. So in the past, 3 to 6 months, it seems like we've just had a number of conversations that are more strategic in nature, and there are these sort of digital initiatives going on to pivot companies more broadly, not just those in Silicon Valley or in tech hubs, towards having comprehensive online presences. And that's really good. That's the exogenous event that will, accelerate the need for language, technology, and services. And I think that presents a lot of opportunity for those of us, working in this field.
Great. Well, Spence, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. I know we have a busy day ahead, so let's leave it here, and hope to catch up in real life at some point still this year. Maybe there's a chance to meet at the conference.
So. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.